Welcome to Story Planet, where we bring you relaxing and peaceful tales to help you unwind. Tonight's story is Heavenly Shelter in the Rainstorm. So, get comfortable, let go of the day, and allow yourself to be swept into a warm, welcoming cottage where kindness and shelter await, all while the soothing sound of rain falls steadily throughout the story, adding to the calm and peaceful atmosphere. Now, let's begin. It had been a long drive. The highway stretched endlessly in front of them, winding through vast fields and occasional patches of dense trees. The sky had turned a moody shade of gray by the time they left the city behind. It was the kind of afternoon that promised rain, but none of them thought it would come so suddenly. As they neared the familiar turnoff, Henry glanced at Grace, who was gazing out at the rolling landscape beyond the highway. "What do you think?" he asked, his hand hovering over the steering wheel. Grace smiled softly, knowing exactly what he meant. "Let's take the countryside route," she replied. It was a longer drive, winding through country roads and small villages, but it had always been their favorite. The highway was faster, a straight shot to their hometown, but the countryside held a kind of magic they never could resist. They had time, after all, and the gentle beauty of the rural landscape always seemed to invite them in. Henry guided the car off the main road, and immediately the world felt quieter, softer. The hum of the highway faded behind them, replaced by the sound of the wind gently rustling through the trees and the faint chirping of birds in the distance. The countryside opened up before them like a painting brought to life. The narrow road curved lazily through endless fields of gold and green, where tall grass swayed in time with the breeze. Here and there, patches of wildflowers burst into view, pinks, purples, and blues scattered like confetti across the landscape. The air smelled fresher, the kind of fresh that carried with it the scent of damp earth and blooming lavender. They passed by sprawling meadows dotted with grazing cows and sheep, their slow movements adding to the peacefulness of the scene. In the distance, low stone walls divided the fields, and beyond them, gentle hills rolled up toward the horizon, their silhouettes darkening as the storm clouds gathered overhead. The road wound deeper into the countryside, where the trees grew thicker and their leaves formed a canopy overhead, filtering the last bits of sunlight that managed to peek through the gathering storm. Each turn in the road revealed something new: a quiet farm tucked into the valley, a pond shimmering in the light drizzle that had begun to fall, or a small village with cottages that looked like they had stood there for centuries. The land seemed to breathe with a calm rhythm, inviting them to slow down, to take in the quiet beauty that unfolded with every passing mile. There were no honking horns or rushing cars here, just the gentle hum of the engine as it carried them through the heart of the countryside. Ella and Max had their faces pressed against the windows, eyes wide with wonder. "Look at those trees," Ella said excitedly, pointing to a cluster of ancient oaks that towered over a small stream. Max smiled, watching the way the light flickered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows on the ground below. Grace leaned back in her seat, her heart swelling with the peace of it all. There was something timeless about these drives, about the way the countryside seemed to hold them in its gentle embrace. The beauty here was quiet, unassuming, but it had a way of filling you up, of reminding you what it meant to simply be. The drizzle had turned into a steady rain now, but they didn't mind. The sound of the rain tapping against the windshield seemed to fit the mood of the afternoon. The countryside felt alive in the rain. The fields looked greener, the air cooler, and the roads, though wet, glistened with a kind of softness that only a rainy day could bring. As they continued on their journey, the road dipped down into a valley where a small river ran alongside them, its water swelling slightly from the rain. On either side of the road, wildflowers continued to bloom, undeterred by the weather, their vibrant colors standing out against the gray sky. It was a long way to their hometown, but that was the point. The countryside, with all its hidden corners and quiet beauty, was a reminder of everything that was slow and peaceful in life. Henry glanced at Grace again, and they shared a smile, a silent acknowledgement of how much they both loved this drive. It was more than just a road home. It was a journey that allowed them to feel grounded, connected to the land, and to one another. The rain began to fall harder as the landscape around them blurred under the storm's relentless downpour. The peaceful, calming rain had now become a curtain of water that made the road nearly invisible, forcing Henry to slow the car to a crawl. As they drove deeper into the countryside, Grace began to feel uneasy. "We should stop somewhere," she suggested, her voice soft but concerned. "The storm doesn't look like it's letting up any time soon." Henry nodded, agreeing as the windshield wipers struggled to keep up with the rain. The road, once clear and picturesque, was now hidden beneath sheets of water. The rain was coming down in thick, steady streams, and they needed shelter. Just ahead, through the haze of rain, they saw a narrow side road that wound through a grove of trees. At the end of the path, a small, weathered stone cottage stood. "There's an old cottage," Henry said, pointing as they approached. "Looks like a good place to wait this out." He carefully guided the car onto the dirt road, the tires squishing in the mud, and pulled up in front of the cottage. The rain hammered down relentlessly on the roof of the car, and the wind shook the trees around them. They waited for a few moments, unsure whether to stay in the car or brave the storm to ask for shelter. As if sensing their dilemma, the door to the cottage swung open, and a man in his 60s stepped out, his face kind and welcoming, despite the torrential rain. He waved them toward the house, calling out over the storm, "You folks look like you need a dry place. Come inside before you get soaked." Henry and Grace exchanged a relieved glance before nodding, grateful for the kindness of strangers. They hurried the kids out of the car, bundling them under jackets as they rushed toward the warmth of the cottage. Inside the cottage was everything they hadn't realized they needed. The scent of burning wood and fresh bread welcomed them as they stepped inside, shaking off the rain. A fire crackled merrily in the stone fireplace, casting a golden glow that made the room feel like a refuge from the storm outside. The man introduced himself as Mr. Hargrove, and soon they were welcomed by his wife, Mrs. Hargrove, a kindly woman with silver hair tucked into a bun. "You must be starving," Mrs. Hargrove said as she ushered them toward the fire. "Dinner's almost ready. We don't get many visitors out here, but we always have room for company." Henry and Grace were overwhelmed by their hospitality. Mr. Hargrove handed Henry a towel and took their coats, placing them near the fire to dry. Ella and Max huddled near the flames, their cheeks pink from the warmth. "Thank you so much," Grace said, as she accepted a cup of tea from Mrs. Hargrove. We were caught in the storm and didn't want to risk driving any farther. Oh, don't you worry, Mrs. Hargrove said with a smile. You can stay the night here. It's far too dangerous to drive in this weather. Dinner was soon served, a hearty meal of roast chicken, fresh vegetables, and bread hot from the oven. The family sat around the wooden dining table, sharing the meal with the Hargroves as if they had known each other for years. The sound of rain tapping against the windows only added to the coziness of the evening. As the meal went on, they learned about the Hargroves' life in the countryside, how they had tended the land for decades, raising their children in the same village that their grandparents had settled in. They told stories of long summers, village festivals, and the peaceful rhythm of life on their small farm. After dinner, they all moved into the living room, gathering around the fireplace for a bit of tea and more conversation. The rain continued to fall heavily outside, but the warmth of the cottage and the company made it feel like the storm didn't exist at all. As the evening grew later, the Hargroves prepared a cozy guest room for Henry, Grace, and the children. The room was small but welcoming, with soft quilts on the beds and a window that looked out onto the rain-soaked fields. The sound of the storm was muted now, a gentle lullaby that filled the night with calm. The children fell asleep almost instantly, their breathing deep, and even as they snuggled into the quilts. Henry and Grace, too, soon drifted off, grateful for the kindness they had found in the unexpected stop. The next morning, they woke to the soft glow of early daylight filtering through the curtains. The rain had eased to a light drizzle, and the world outside felt fresh and calm. Downstairs, the smell of breakfast filled the air. Fresh eggs, toast, and tea brewed to perfection. After a hearty meal, Mr. Hargrove suggested they take a tour of the village and farm before continuing their journey. The Hargroves led them through the village, a picturesque place with cobblestone streets and cottages nestled among trees and gardens. The rain had left everything glistening in the morning light, and the village seemed to shimmer with a kind of timeless charm. The small market was just opening, and the bakery was already busy, the scent of fresh bread wafting through the air. After exploring the village, they made their way to the Hargroves' farm. It was a peaceful place, with wide-open fields and rows of crops stretching toward the horizon. The kids ran through the grass, laughing as they chased one another, while Henry and Grace walked hand in hand, taking in the beauty of the countryside. By lunchtime, they returned to the cottage for one last meal with the Hargroves. Mrs. Hargrove had prepared a simple but delicious spread of salad, fresh vegetables, and homemade bread. They ate outside under the shade of an oak tree, the light breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and the distant sound of birds. As the afternoon wore on, they knew it was time to resume their journey. They packed their things, thanked the Hargroves for their incredible hospitality, and promised to visit again. It was hard to leave such a serene and welcoming place, but their hearts were full as they drove away, back toward the road home. As the countryside stretched out before them once again, Henry glanced at Grace. "That was something special," he said softly. Grace smiled, her hand resting gently on his arm. "It was. We'll definitely be back." Max and Ella, who had been quietly looking out the windows, chimed in from the back seat. "Can we come back soon?" Max asked. Henry nodded, a peaceful smile on his face. Absolutely. With that, they continued on their journey, the memory of the rainy stopover and the kindness of the Hargroves lingering in their hearts. Thank you for joining us on Story Planet. If you felt like you stepped into the cozy cottage, heard the rain softly tapping on the windows, and shared a peaceful evening with newfound friends, consider giving a thumbs up. And if the story brought you warmth and comfort, feel free to share it with friends and family. Don't forget to subscribe for daily stories from Story Planet, offering peaceful escapes every day. Wishing you a peaceful night and a relaxed sleep. Sweet dreams.